The zip ties clicked around his wrists before he could finish saying his rank. Officer Darren Kowalski thought he had just intercepted a drug courier. He thought the crisp dress uniform folded in the back seat was rented. He thought the medal case on the passenger seat was a prop from a costume shop. He thought the man standing beside a black Cadillac Escalade on the shoulder of Highway 401 outside Belleville, Ontario, was running product for someone in Kingston. He was right, catastrophically wrong. The man he had just shoved face first against the hood was Brigadier General Kwame Asante-Boateng, Deputy Commander of 4 Canadian Division, recipient of the Meritorious Service Cross, and the officer responsible for coordinating Canada's entire eastern logistics chain for the upcoming NATO summit in Halifax. In 38 minutes, Kowalski's career wouldn't just be suspended, it would be erased, and he would spend the rest of his life explaining to people exactly why. The morning had started cleanly. It was a Thursday in late September, the kind of morning that makes Ontario look like a painting. Maples going amber along the 401, the air sharp and honest, the sky the particular shade of blue that only appears after the first cold snap. Brigadier General Kwame Asante-Boateng had left his home in Kingston at 6:45. He was not in uniform. He was wearing a charcoal wool overcoat, dark slacks, and leather gloves because the steering wheel on an autumn morning in eastern Ontario holds the cold like a grudge. He was 51 years old, broad-shouldered, and moved with the quiet authority of a man who had spent 3 decades earning the right not to explain himself. He had driven this stretch of highway hundreds of times. His parents had driven it in the early 1980s, immigrating from Kuntasee with 2 suitcases and a plan. He had driven it as a boy on weekend hockey trips. He had driven it home from CFB Petawawa after his first deployment briefing. The 401 was as familiar to him as the sound of his own breath. He was not speeding. His cruise control was set at 103 kilometers per hour. The limit was 100. He knew the number to the decimal point because Kwame Asante-Boateng was a man who did not guess at things that could be measured. He saw the cruiser before it moved, an OPP unit tucked behind a construction equipment sign just past the Napanee overpass. As he passed, the lights came on. He exhaled slowly, checked his mirrors, signaled, and pulled off onto the wide gravel shoulder with the precise care of a man who understood that how you stopped mattered as much as why. The officer who approached was not young in the way Officer Miller had been young, reckless and untempered. Darren Kowalski was 34, experienced enough to have developed bad habits and not experienced enough to have learned which ones would bury him. He walked up to the Escalade with the flat energy of a man who had already decided what he was looking at. He didn't come to the window. He stopped at the B-pillar, forcing Kwame to look back over his shoulder. "License and registration," Kowalski said. No greeting, no indication of why. "Good morning, officer," Kwame said evenly. "Can you tell me the nature of the stop?" "License and registration, sir." Kwame reached for the glove compartment with deliberate, visible movements. "I'm reaching for the glove box," he said calmly. "My registration is inside." Kowalski peered into the vehicle. His eyes moved the way eyes move when they are looking for something they've already decided to find. They passed over the leather interior, the government-issued GPS unit on the dash, the small Canadian flag pin on the lapel of the overcoat hanging from the rear hook. Then they stopped on the back seat, a dress uniform in a clear garment bag. The rank insignia on the shoulder boards, a single maple leaf star below crossed swords and a crown, was clearly visible through the plastic. "What's that in the back?" "My uniform," Kwame said, handing over his license. Kowalski looked at the license, then at Kwame, then back at the uniform. "What kind of uniform?" "Canadian Army." Kowalski snorted. It was a small sound, barely audible, but it was there. "Right, step out of the vehicle, please." "Officer, I'm happy to provide my military identification. I said step out." Kwame recognized the sequence. He had been briefed on it at a diversity training session at RMC years ago, and had sat in the back of the room thinking it would never happen to him on a domestic highway. Now here it was, as textbook as a training scenario. He opened the door and stepped out into the cold morning air. He stood 6'1". His posture didn't change when he was nervous, because he had trained it out of himself somewhere in the middle of his career. He looked at Kowalski directly. "Officer, I want to cooperate fully. My name is Kwame Asante-Boateng. I am a Brigadier General with the Canadian Army. My identification." "Hands on the hood," Kowalski said. "Spread your feet." "That is not necessary." "Hands on the hood." Kwame placed his palms flat on the cold metal. He stared at the gravel beneath his feet and entered the same operational stillness he used during hostage coordination calls. He catalogued everything: the temperature of the hood, the sound of passing transport trucks, the crunch of Kowalski's boots on gravel. A second cruiser arrived. The officer who stepped out was named Paul Hetchuk, a staff sergeant who outranked Kowalski and should have outthought him. He didn't. He chewed on a coffee straw, tilted his head and looked at the Escalade. What have you got, Kowalski? Possible impaired. Suspicious vehicle. He's claiming military. Hetchuk walked over to Kwame. He looked him over with the leisurely disrespect of a man who believed he had all the time in the world. Military, huh? What branch? Canadian Army. I am Brigadier General Kwame Asante-Boateng, Deputy Commander, 4 Canadian Division. Hetchuk laughed through his nose. My cousin's in the reserves. He's a corporal. No offense, but generals don't drive alone on the 401 in a civilian vehicle. I am on authorized leave returning to base, Kwame said. My identification is in this breast pocket of the jacket on my back seat. If you retrieve it, this will resolve itself in under 2 minutes. Hetchuk looked at the jacket through the window. He opened the rear door and pulled the garment bag out without asking. He unzipped it. He reached into the breast pocket of the uniform jacket and pulled out a laminated card. He turned it over. It was a Department of National Defense identification card. Photo of Kwame, stern and direct, rank Brigadier General. Service number. Security clearance indicator in the top right corner, the kind that made customs officers at Pearson go quiet and wave people through without questions. Hetchuk squinted at it. Then he looked up at Kwame, then back at the card. It could be fabricated, he said finally. There are moments in a person's life when they understand exactly what they are dealing with. Not who, what. Kwame felt no anger in that moment. He felt a cold, clarifying certainty settle in his chest like ballast weight on a naval vessel. This was not stupidity, this was choice. Sergeant, Kwame said, his voice dropping in a way that junior officers on 3 continents had learned to recognize. I strongly recommend you call the number on the back of that card. It is a DND security verification line. The call will take 90 seconds. After that, you will have a decision to make about how you proceed. Hetchuk pocketed the card. Then he nodded to Kowalski. What happened next took 11 seconds. Kowalski grabbed Kwame's right wrist, twisted it behind his back with unnecessary force, and zip-tied it to his left. The plastic cut into the radial nerve with a sharpness Kwame would feel for 3 days. Hetchuk told him he was being detained for obstruction and suspected impersonation of a public official. Kwame said 3 words, I want counsel. Kowalski pushed him into the back of the cruiser. As the door closed, Kwame noticed something through the window. A transport driver had pulled over 50 meters ahead, door open, standing outside, holding a phone. Good, Kwame thought, bear witness. They drove for 26 minutes without speaking. Kwame sat with his wrists bound behind him and organized his thoughts the way he organized field logistics. Methodically, without wasted energy. They were not taking him somewhere to help him. They were taking him somewhere to process him, which meant he needed a phone before they got him into booking. The detachment was a flat beige building in a light industrial stretch outside Belleville. Kowalski marched him through the entrance. The desk constable, a woman in her mid-40s named Sergeant Renata Ogeek, looked up from her screen. She looked at Kwame. She looked at the zip ties. She looked at Kowalski. What's the charge? Obstruction, suspected impersonation of a DND officer. Ogeek stared at Kwame for a long moment. She had been with the OPP for 19 years. She had a sense for things that could not be taught in any training module. Did you check his ID? It looked fabricated, Hetchuk said. Ogeek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Get him a phone, she said. Processing first. Get him a phone, Darren. Her voice carried the quiet precision of someone who will not be repeating themselves. Kowalski cut the zip ties with a look of irritation and handed Kwame his personal phone from the property envelope. 1 call, on speaker, 3 minutes. Kwame did not call a lawyer. He did not call his wife, though she would have had the entire thing sorted within 20 minutes. He opened his contacts and dialed a number he had memorized in 2019 and hoped never to use in this context. The call connected on the second ring. Duty Operations NHQ identify. Priority read, Brigadier General Kwame Asante-Boateng. Authentication, Delta Foxtrot 77 Golf. I need a direct line to the commander, 4 Canadian Division. Immediate. There was a pause of exactly 4 seconds. Then, authentication confirmed, General Asante-Boateng. Please stand by. I'm also logging this call. You're on record. Hetchuk's coffee straw fell out of his mouth. Kowalski stopped moving. Ogeek behind the desk put her pen down very slowly. The line clicked once. Then a voice came through, calm, clipped, unmistakably, the voice of Major General Diane Thibodeau. commander of 4 Canadian Division and one of the most decorated officers in the Canadian Army. Kwame, you were supposed to be at the Halifax pre-brief in 4 hours. What's happening? General Thibodeau, Kwame said clearly, loud enough for every person in the room to hear. I am currently being held at an OPP detachment outside Belleville. I was pulled over on the 401, zip-tied, and brought in on charges of impersonating a military officer. My D&D identification was dismissed as fabricated. I am requesting intervention through proper channels. The silence on the line lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Major General Thibodeau said very quietly, "Say that again, Kwame." "I am in an OPP holding area, General. Zip-tied. My hands are free now, but I was restrained on the roadside." "Stay on the line." She said something in the background, rapid French, the tone of someone who has just understood that several careers are about to end before lunch. Then, clearly, "Get me the commissioner's office, get me Jag, and somebody call Mackenzie." Hrechuk sat down on a bench without being told to. He looked like a man watching the horizon change shape into something that did not make sense. Ogweek picked up the desk phone and dialed the detachment commander's cell. When he answered, she said only, "Sir, you need to come in now. No, now. I can't explain over the phone. Just come." 7 minutes passed. They felt geological in their slowness. The windows began to vibrate before anyone heard the sound. A low rhythmic percussion that started at the edges of perception and moved inward until it was impossible to ignore. Rotors. Military rotors, not the steady thump of a medevac chopper but the heavier, more purposeful beat of CH-147 Chinooks repositioned from Trenton, which was 18 kilometers up the road. Kowalski went to the window. He looked out. His face did not change expression because his face had stopped processing information fast enough to generate expressions. 3 black SUVs with D&D plates had pulled into the lot in a formation that was not casual. They did not park, they positioned. 2 figures in Canadian Forces Military Police red and blue armbands stepped out of the lead vehicle, followed by a woman in a sharp civilian blazer, carrying a leather briefcase. The front door opened without anyone buzzing them in. "Military Police," the lead MP said. His voice had the flat, exhausted authority of someone who had been called away from something important. "Where is Brigadier General Asante-Boateng?" Ogweek pointed. The MP walked to Kwame. He came to attention. The salute was precise. "Sir. Warrant Officer Tremblay, Canadian Forces Military Police, we have your location. Are you injured?" Nerve bruising on both wrists from the restraints, nothing requiring immediate attention. "Understood, we have medics outside." Tremblay turned to look at Hrechuk and Kowalski with the expression of a man who has found mold in a place where mold should not be. Which one applied the restraints? Hrechuk pointed at Kowalski without hesitation. It was, Kwame would later think, the fastest Hrechuk had moved in the entire encounter. The woman in the blazer stepped forward. "General Asante-Boateng, I'm Isabelle Garreau, Office of the JAG. We've been authorized by the Minister of National Defense to take jurisdictional involvement here. The Commissioner of the OPP has been notified directly. An investigation has been opened." Just then, the detachment commander, Inspector Roy Pelletier, came through the back entrance. He was still pulling his jacket on. He looked at the MPs. He looked at Garreau. He looked at Kwame. Then he looked at Hrechuk and Kowalski with the expression of a man who has found out his house is on fire while he was at the grocery store. "What?" Pelletier said with a specific flatness in his voice. "Did you two do?" Kowalski started to speak. Kwame turned to look at him. He said nothing. He simply looked and Kowalski stopped. "General," Pelletier said, crossing the room with the urgency of a man trying to close a very large gap very quickly, "on behalf of this detachment." "Inspector," Kwame said quietly, "please don't apologize to me. The apology you owe is to everyone on the 401 who doesn't have a direct line to NDHQ." Pelletier closed his mouth. Outside, the video had already started moving. The transport driver who had stopped on the shoulder was a man named Dale Fournier from Brockville. He had been streaming casually for the past year, mostly highway observations and truck stop food reviews, and had 4,000 followers. He uploaded the footage of the roadside stop with no caption, just the description. "This doesn't look right. Highway 401 outside Napanee." By the time Kwame walked out of the detachment into the cold September morning, the clip had been viewed 200,000 times. By the time he reached Halifax for the rescheduled pre-brief, at 6 that evening, it was on CBC, CTV and every major Canadian Twitter feed. The video showed everything. It showed Kwame's hands, visible on the steering wheel before he pulled over. It showed the measured, careful way he opened his door. It showed the zip ties going on while he was still speaking, still explaining, still offering identification that had been ignored. The hashtag was not angry in the way such things sometimes are. It was quiet and it was sustained and it was national in the way that things become national in Canada, through accumulation rather than explosion. By midnight, it had been mentioned in a question to the Minister of National Defence in an emergency scrum outside the House of Commons. Kwame's daughter, Nana, called while he was in the back of a DND vehicle heading to Trenton to catch his flight. "Dad, are you watching this?" "I'm aware of it. The CBC just played the part where you said, 'I want counsel,' and Kowalski shoved you into the car, Dad. They played it 4 times in a row." "I know, Nana." "People are," she paused. He could hear her trying to calibrate. Nana was 26, and she was precise about language. "People are not okay with this." "Good," he said, and he meant it. "Are you?" There was a pause that lasted a few seconds longer than it should have. "I've been better," he admitted. "My wrists are sore. But I have work to do, and the work doesn't stop because someone made a mistake on a highway." She was quiet for a moment. "You're not calling it a mistake?" "No," he said, "I'm not." The investigation that followed moved with an institutional thoroughness that was sometimes mistaken for slowness. It was not slow, it was meticulous, which is different. The OPP's Professional Standards Bureau opened files on both Kowalski and Rechuk within 24 hours. The JAG office cross-referenced the incident against Kwame's service record, his GPS log, the detachment's own dashcam footage, Kowalski's bodycam footage, which, unlike in certain other stories, had been operating correctly, and the independent footage from the transport driver. The bodycam footage was particularly instructive. It captured the moment Rechuk looked at the DND identification card, paused, and chose to pocket it anyway. That footage was played in the disciplinary hearing 7 weeks later without commentary. It needed none. What the investigation also uncovered over the following month was a pattern, not as dramatic as a ledger with initials and dollar amounts, but a pattern nonetheless. Kowalski had filed 3 prior reports citing suspicious behavior against drivers with no moving violations, all of them on the same stretch of the 401, all of them involving black or brown drivers, all of them resulting in extended detentions and, in 2 cases, vehicle searches that found nothing. Rechuk had signed off on all 3. Inspector Pelletier had reviewed none of them. The hearing was conducted in Toronto. Kwame testified in his dress uniform. He wore his medals. They were not decorations. They were a record. 3 decades of decisions under pressure, in the field, in conference rooms, in situations where the wrong call cost more than a career. He sat at the witness table with the same composure he brought to everything, and he answered every question in full sentences. The OPP's legal representative, in what can only be described as a miscalculation of the available evidence, attempted to suggest that Kwame's tone during the stop may have escalated the situation. Kwame looked at the panel. "I narrated every movement I made. I offered identification twice before being restrained. I asked for the reason for the stop before providing any documentation. These are protocols that exist precisely because stops like this one can turn fatal. I followed every one of them." He paused. "If my composure read as a threat, that's not a problem with my composure." The panel chair wrote something down. Kowalski was dismissed from the OPP without pension eligibility. Rechuk was given a final written warning, stripped of supervisory authority, and reassigned to administrative duties. A decision that generated its own controversy, and which the OPP commissioner later acknowledged was under review. Inspector Pelletier was placed on a performance improvement plan and required to complete mandatory equity training alongside his entire command. The Ontario Attorney General announced a review of stop and identify protocols across the province. The Minister of National Defence made a statement in the House of Commons that included, in its 3rd paragraph, a commitment to developing formal protocols for the identification of DND personnel during civilian law enforcement interactions, a gap that, until that Thursday morning, no one had formally closed. 6 months after the stop, Kwame Asante-Boateng was promoted. Major General Asante-Boateng assumed command of 4 Canadian Division. He was the 3rd black officer to hold that position in Canadian military history, and the first whose promotion had been announced alongside a piece of provincial legislation, the Highway Dignity Act, which mandated independent review of all extended traffic detentions lasting longer than 15 minutes and required all bodycam footage to be automatically uploaded to a secure provincial server inaccessible to responding officers. On the day his new rank was pinned, he drove himself to the ceremony, same highway, same route. He set the cruise control to 103. There was no cruiser waiting behind the billboard. 3 months after the hearing, Warrant Officer Tremblay forwarded him a piece of mail that had been sent to the CB Kingston Administrative Office. No return address. It was a white envelope's index inside was a single index card. On it in handwriting that was careful and deliberate, someone had written, "I knew when I saw the card. I'm fronted on. That's not an excuse. I'm sorry." It was not signed. Kwame knew whose handwriting it was. He held the card for a long time. Then he folded it and put it in his desk drawer behind his service record and in front of a photograph of his parents taken at Pearson Airport in 1981, the day they arrived. Two people who had crossed an ocean carrying nothing but credentials, the new country, would spend years finding reasons not to recognize. He thought about what to do with the card, whether to report it, whether to ignore it, whether to write back. He wrote back. He wrote 4 sentences. He said he had received the letter. He said accountability was not the same as punishment. He said that understanding what you did wrong and why you did it was the beginning of not doing it again. And he said that if the person who wrote the card spent the rest of their life in the kind of work that required them to look harder and longer before making a decision about someone they didn't understand, that would matter more to him than any apology. He sealed the envelope. He drove it to the post office himself. Major General Kwame Asante-Boateng returned to his office. He had a NATO logistics brief in 40 minutes. He put on his uniform jacket, checked the medals were straight, and sat down at his desk. The highway outside Kingston was the same as it had always been. The maples were bare now, the grey of winter settling in, the 401 running east and west through the cold without ceremony or apology. He had work to do. He did it. What happened on that September morning on Highway 401 was not remarkable because a general was stopped. It was remarkable because of what it took to make it stop. One call, the right rank, the right contacts, a driver with a phone and 4,000 followers who happened to be paying attention. Without any one of those things, Brigadier General Kwame Asante-Boateng might have been processed, charged, and released with a story no one believed. The system didn't protect him. He knew the right number to call, and that made all the difference, which means the system still has work to do. If this story made you stop and think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Sounds of Justice and don't miss what's coming next. I keep thinking about the moment. Rechuk looked at that DND card. He held it in his hands, he read it, he understood what it said, and then he put it in his pocket anyway. That's the part that stays with me. Not the zip ties, not the cruiser, not the detachment booking room. It's that moment of choice. Because everything that followed, every consequence, every career ended, every piece of legislation passed, every headline written, it all traces back to that single decision made on the shoulder of the 401 by a man who knew he was wrong and did it anyway. I think about what Kwame Asante-Boateng must have felt standing against the hood of that Escalade, hands visible, narrating his own movements like he'd been taught to do, just to stay safe on a road his family had driven for 40 years. He didn't lose his composure, not once. And I think that's worth sitting with, because it would have been the easiest thing in the world to raise his voice, to show his frustration, to let 30 years of being underestimated come out all at once in that cold September air. He didn't. He stayed precise. He stayed methodical. He filed everything in his mind like a logistics brief and waited for the moment he could act on it. That kind of steadiness isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, slowly, over years of making the harder choice when the easier one is right there. That's what I mean when I think about what it actually takes to carry yourself with integrity. Not the dramatic version of it, not the kind that's easy to perform when everyone's watching, but the kind that holds when you're standing handcuffed on a highway and the person who should be listening to you has already decided not to. That's character. That's the thing that can't be faked and can't be taken away. And then there's the intelligence of it, the clarity of mind to know exactly what call to make, to dial the right number from memory, to say the right words in the right sequence, to understand that the situation required precision more than emotion. People sometimes talk about staying calm under pressure, as if it's just a personality trait, something some people have and others don't. I don't think that's right. I think it's a skill, built out of preparation and self-knowledge and the honest understanding of what a situation requires. Kwame knew what this required. He had spent his career learning how to read environments and respond to them with accuracy. He used every bit of that on a Tuesday morning on the 401. What I find myself returning to, though, is what he did with the card. The handwritten index card from Kowalski, unsigned and careful, and too late. He didn't throw it out, he didn't report it, he wrote back, 4 sentences. He told Kowalski that understanding what you did wrong was the beginning of not doing it again. That, to me, is the measure of someone who has thought seriously about what justice is actually for, not punishment alone, but the possibility of something changing because of it. The consequences in this story weren't accidental. They were the direct result of a man who refused to be diminished even when everything around him was designed to make him feel small. What you do when no one powerful is watching, what you hold on to when the system fails you, what you choose to become after something like that. That's the story underneath the story. And that's the one worth carrying with you.